Please welcome to the stage the panel for this afternoon's discussion, moderated by Chris Geidner, publisher and author of Law Dork.
Hello, everybody. Here we are, the final plenary panel, and we have with me, we'll start from the end, Phil Brest, the ACS's president since January 2026. Prior to joining ACS, Brest served as the White House senior counsel, directed Biden administration's judicial nominations. Before joining the White House, he spent 6 years working for the Senate Judiciary Committee, most recently as chief counsel for nominations and senior advisor to U.S. Senator Dick Durbin. Welcome, Phil. Next, we have Alice O'Brien, the general counsel to the National Education Association. Representing 3 million educators who serve our nation's schools and institutions of higher education, Alice has served in this role since March of 2010. So a lot that has passed under the bridge since then. Prior to that, Alice served as chief counsel to the California Teachers Association and as an associate and then member of the labor law firm of Bredoff and Kaiser. Next, we have Taylor Brown, who serves as director of the New York City Mayor's Office of LGBTQIA+ Affairs. Prior to joining the mayor's office, she was an assistant attorney general in the Civil Rights Bureau at the Office of the New York State Attorney General. Before joining the Attorney General's office, she spent nearly 7 years at Lambda Legal Defense and Education Fund and at the National Office of the American Civil Liberty Union, LGBTQ+, and HIV Project. Finally, next to me, we have Kalpana Kotagal, designated as by President Biden as a member of the EEOC back in 2023. Welcome. Yes. We'll have much to say about her role now. She joined the EEOC in 2023 for a term expiring in June 2027. A little happened in between then. Immediately prior to joining the commission, she was a partner at Cohen Milstein, where she specialized in civil rights and employment law and chaired the firm's hiring and diversity committee. We can talk about that and whether that's still legal. So, even saying that sort of fits in with the topic of today, of this panel, staying in the fight. When I was approached about moderating this panel, I was really excited, coming as it does. I've been a DC resident for more than half my life, and it's Pride weekend. However, fitting perfectly with the theme of staying in the fight, it's only Pride weekend this weekend because we had to move it back a week so that Donald Trump could have his birthday party. That's how we're staying in the fight in DC. And when I found out the names of who would be joining us, I was just so excited because we are going to be bringing you just an incredible breadth of what that looks like and how people are doing so in this moment. And so I'd like to start right next to me, the most direct in-government role that we have, and just start with a really direct question. What role do those still in the government have to play in this moment?
I'm really glad to be here with all of you. ACS is near and dear to my heart. I was thinking about maybe my first convention as a 3L, which maybe was one of the first conventions that ACS did. So it's good to be back with all of you. Yeah, I mean, it's obviously a pretty strange time in the federal government. It has been, I'll say, interesting to be the sole remaining Democratic commissioner left at the EEOC. My staff and I spend a lot of time thinking about what our role is these days. And, I think we feel a great sense of privilege to still be there, and also a tremendous responsibility to do everything we can to ensure that the agency is staying true to its mission, to its purpose of preventing and remedying employment discrimination and advancing equal employment opportunity for all. It hasn't changed with the change of administration that there are workers all over the country who still rely on the EEOC, right, to vindicate their rights. And I think that that's just a critically important piece of this. So what are we doing, right? We are doing a lot of outreach, working with stakeholders who are relevant to the work we do. I spend a lot of time supporting our career staff who are deep in the trenches. But I also think that it's really important to be, in this role, vocal, to provide an affirmative view, an actual view of civil rights, one that is grounded in the law and is contrary
Novel.
to the, to the positions that this administration is articulating. I thought maybe I'd share a couple examples of some of the things that we've been up to in the last few months.
One thing I do want to
tell
say,
me.
one of the and we're going to be dealing with this as the Supreme Court decisions come down. One of the big things that happened was when the removal of Chair Burrows and Commissioner Samuels, leaving you in this position, but the commission regained quorum.
Yes, that's right.
Back in October.
That's right.
And so there's both sort of this broader principle that you're talking about,
That's
and
right.
also a sort of not even micro, because it is federal, but this macro governmental argument that you're having to deal with daily now that they have quorum.
That's exactly right. And so we lost quorum for about 10 months. And Chris, you're exactly right. We regained quorum with the confirmation of my colleague in October, Brittany Panuccio. They moved very quickly, as you might imagine. And so, that has meant that we are confronting very specific choices. For example, in January, when they moved to rescind the harassment guidance, right, which was a critical document, hadn't been updated for 25 years. You can go back and find it in various places, but no longer on the EEOC's website because it's gone. That would have gone by quietly, but for us calling for a meeting. And so those kinds of choices, right, where we are in a position to make the public argument about what the law demands and what the EEOC should be doing is particularly important. I spend a fair bit of time working through dissents, right? What does it mean to dissent in this moment, and why does it matter? And in the context of, most recently, my Republican colleagues pushing through rescinding our strategic enforcement plan and pushing through a new national enforcement plan that makes explicit the administration and the chair's priorities, I dissented. And I think we know from the work that's happening in courts around the country, I think all of us are reading KBJ's dissents on the regular. Dissent is an important tool. It plays a critical role, both in staking out an alternative worldview, an affirmative view of civil rights, as I said, one that I think is grounded in the law, but also is hopefully a path of breadcrumbs, right, that will bring us back when we are so fortunate to get back. So those are some of the things we're thinking about. But just briefly before I turn the mic over, because I know all of my fellow co-panelists have brilliant things to say, I also just want to acknowledge, right, that while we're privileged to be in a position to do this work, privileged, challenged, there's a lot of ways to think about what our role is right now.
Depends on the hour.
Depends on the hour, literally, to be at the EEOC and doing the work that my staff and I are doing. I think it's very clear, and I know my fellow panelists on the stage will speak to this, because their work is vitally important, and so is the work of everybody else. I really see us at an inflection point right now as a country, right? People are struggling. And I think there is a question that all of the folks all over the country are asking themselves about whether government can truly make their lives better. what is the purpose of government? And I think from that perspective, I think my role, in part, is about telling a story about what government can and should be doing, what agencies like the EEOC can and should be doing, and why the fight for equal employment opportunity is far from finished, and what the work ahead and the work right now looks like. I come from a view of government that's fundamentally optimistic, that's fundamentally hopeful, and I know, God knows, that we have plenty of imperfections and plenty of shortcomings in government, particularly right now. But the reality is that government, at its best, works to protect those who don't have access, is sometimes the only pathway for the most marginalized among us to vindicate their rights. And I think this moment calls for us, for those of us in government, to not be quiet about what the law demands and what government can and should be about. We have to articulate some alternative to what we're seeing now to remind our fellow Americans about what government can and should be about. So, I mean, that's sort of how my staff and I think. Thank you. I appreciate that so much. That's how my staff and I are thinking about the work that we're doing on a daily basis.
I really appreciate that. And as somebody who covered the EEOC in depth over the course of the past more than 12 years, it has been astounding just to see how quickly things can change.
That's right.
And I think that also gives me hope, although we were talking before the panel about the long-term consequences, but also how quickly, hopefully, it can change back.
I hope so.
Moving outward, we've had a lot of experience with, for good and bad, the roles of institutions in this moment outside of government. And Alice, I'd like to turn to you. Working from the NEA, what is it that you have seen in terms of staying in this fight about what role institutions play?
Thanks for the question. And before I do that, I just want to thank ACS for this fabulous convention. It has been thought-provoking and exciting. And thank you, Commissioner, for staying in the fight in a really hard time to do that. Your dissents,
Thanks,
you know,
Alice.
provide a roadmap to the future. And we appreciate the work that you and your staff and the other federal career servants in the federal government are doing every day to
Thanks, Alice.
keep those institutions moving forward. So I think it's important to unpack a little bit about what we mean by institutions. A lot of times when we talk about institutions, we're talking about the the rules of the road, the way things work. And I think your question is really about institutions as organizations, right? And organizations are an important part of the fight right now because organizations have capacity, have the ability to move agendas over time, have the ability to transmit and develop professional norms over time, like views of constitutional interpretation, for example, that ACS works on. And in the immediate days after this administration took over, legal organizations played a really critical role in pushing back. And they were able to do that because they were ready, right? Mm-hmm. We all read Project 2025, and we all knew what was going to happen and what was really going to happen. And so you heard from the state AGs earlier in the program, like they came in on day one ready to litigate. And all of the pro bono, low bono legal organizations did too, right? I love the fact that all of our legal organizations are like democracy organizations, like Democracy Forward and Protect Democracy and the State Defenders of Democracy, right? They were ready to go on day one, and all of our long-standing civil rights organizations were ready to go on day one. MALDEF, LDF, ACLU, GLAD, Lambda, right? Everybody has been in the courts. And of course, unions have been a critical part of that fight as well, both in terms of bringing litigation and supporting litigation and finding plaintiffs for litigation. The labor movement represents millions of people across the country, and that's a big audience to engage in this conversation. And I think that organizational conversation in the labor movement has been particularly important in doing the telling people your rights piece of the work that the commissioner was talking about. It's really important for people to understand, Jenny was talking about this on the last panel as well, for people to understand what their rights are and for lawyers to tell them what their rights are in ways that they can understand. So I think institutions are critical because they provide the capacity, the resilience to move forward. We've also seen that institutions, you know, they have some drawbacks too. They can be stayed, right? Institutions are stayed. Institutions are set in their ways. Institutions are unlikely to collaborate, right? A little bit turfy sometimes. And risk averse, right? And people who advise institutions, lawyers who advise institutions can be pretty risk averse too. And I think we've seen in the first almost 2 years, could it please be almost 2 years of this administration, some institutions really pull their punches and fold their tents, which has been unfortunate. Some of that has been at the law firm level, right? People who are, have all the political and social capital in the world, protecting their book of business as opposed to protecting our democracy. That's really a problem. Higher education institutions too, right? Who are very vulnerable to the federal government because the amount of federal funding that they receive, particularly to fund research. They are very vulnerable, and I think I didn't anticipate them to be quite so vulnerable, quite so ready to be silenced. So that, I think, is a learning, but just to allow you to segue to your, to your next question, I mean, the good news is institutions are made of people, right? And one thing, we are made of people, and people change their minds. And also the people who staff institutions change. And I think we've all seen in this administration, they have taught us this lesson very well. They have changed people really quickly in order to change the institutions and to collapse institutions that we all relied on. And we should take that lesson to heart. Like, the people are really important and the relationships with the people are really important, and that's why conventions like this are critical.
What? I mean, I think that's true, and I think you got a little into it, but I do think there's this reality, for better or worse, and I'll take the hit for it's not just the law firms and higher education, but we've seen it for media companies as well. Like, we have some very prominent, good examples for future lessons about what it looks like when institutions don't hold up the values that they asserted were key to them. From the perspective of working within one of the institutions that is working to hold up those values, like, how do you deal with that, with the fact that there are other institutions that aren't doing what you thought was their role?
You just do your job better. Do your job better, talk louder, build new relationships, reach outside your own organization, look for unlikely allies, collaborate more. I mean, there are more of us, there are more of our organizations than they have. I just think that's a fact. And we need to work together.
Thank you. When we are looking at the way that that things have gone, there has been both this outward in DC and also this downward pull. And the importance, you talked about the state AGs, the importance of state and local government has not been more clear, to the left at least, in a long time. And we're lucky to have you here, Taylor. What role have you seen, both from your experience in state and local government, of state and local government playing in this moment?
Yeah, thank you. And I'll echo all of the thanks to ACS and for having this. So for me, I will say I joined the Attorney General's office in 2024. I will say prior to that, I never thought I would join government. That would seem like hell to me, if I'm being so honest. But what changed me is when I started going through my interview processes at the Attorney General's office. And what I can say, and I will say this about Attorney General James, who is one of my sheroes, who is the realest deal there is out there. She is so committed to the rule of law across areas, and I was in the Civil Rights Bureau as an Assistant Attorney General, but even seeing, and as we're talking about what leadership looks like, even looking at the bureau chiefs that she's appointed, even looking at the division chiefs she's appointed, people of color, women, like heavily the majority in this instance. And that to me really changed, and an investment in the Civil Rights Bureau in a way that I just don't think that we had ever seen under Attorney General Cuomo, Attorney General Schneiderman. And then I think, and I'll get to this, but for me, what that meant is that she was bringing in people like me from an impact litigation space at the ACLU. She's bringing in public interest attorneys. She's bringing in public defenders. She's bringing in people that not only have the lived experience through demographic-based criteria, but also people who have then turned their lives into public servants and making sure that the most marginalized amongst us have access to justice in a big way. And that really, really was something that just impressed me. And I mean, I can say now, it was the best job I've ever had. I mean, I never thought I would say that. The best job would be winning the lottery, but we're not there yet. So I'll say that. And so in joining the AG's office, coming from the ACLU, I had only done trans rights cases up until that point, and I came at a time to do racial justice work on the hopes that Kamala Harris would win. She did not win, and so that summer we spent getting ready for Project 2025. We started our multi-state coalitions with Democratic AG's offices to get this work going. And so for me, for most of my 2 years there, I played a lead on our racial justice work in the multi-state litigations. And so this was obviously the first 100 days we were focused on executive orders. The next after that was the regulatory stuff. And again, AG James was 10 toes down. She put the people in charge that needed to be in charge. She trusted their leadership, and we were successful in a lot of ways. And I think when you look at some of our multi-state partners, I think, for example, California, I think, for example, Maryland, a lot of people of color are now, again, I think as we talk about how government change and how institutions change, are coming into power and in these positions. And I think that cannot be understated and how important that is, because again, the Attorney General's office is a 200-something-year-old office. It has looked a certain way and operated a certain way for a very long time, and that's the way that you have institutional change. I was the first trans person to be hired as an assistant attorney general in the state of New York. That's, I guess for a lot of people, that's a big thing. But what that means is that when we have a locality that has decided to violate state constitutional and state statutory law, I lead that case against Nassau County to hold them accountable for those things. And then, so I think moving from state government where you have an attorney general who was so committed, especially to the racial justice elements, because of who she is, and also because of her expertise. Moving to the mayoral administration of Mayor Mamdani. Completely out of the blue for me. I keep telling people, and I'm gonna keep saying it, I did not apply. They reached out to me, and that was great. It was very, I think I was surprised. I asked them initially, I said, are you sure? Me? I can be a little bit prickly, I think, as a litigator, but it's because I want to win. So coming into that has also been very different. Today marks my 2nd-month anniversary in office, and it has been quite busy. But again, speaking on a macro level, what I think about as I have conversations with other agency heads, like our City Commission on Human Rights, with our, and then some of, well, I won't call them problematic, but agencies that need reform. What I will say, even in that leadership, when you look across the Mamdani administration, I think we have around 72 agencies, and you look at who he has appointed, it is very much the same thing that I saw at the Attorney General's office to make real change. Our Department of Corrections, the new commissioner there, this is a formerly incarcerated person. This has never happened in the history of New York City. I'm the first trans person to lead a New York City agency or office. Yeah. And those kinds of things are big because it's not only, visibility is important, but I don't want to be visible without authority and power. And that is something that I think is very, very important as you come into these roles. And that's sort of how I've thought about it. And the biggest thing that I will say that the administration has focused on is this cross-agency approach in a way that I think oftentimes government works in silos, and those silos do us all a disservice. But all of those silos have the same civil rights mandates. If you're focused on housing, you have the same civil rights mandates to address disparities, to address housing discrimination. If you're working in the healthcare space, it is the same thing. And so that being supported by the mayor, something that is part of his campaign, and that is something embedded in all of our mandates as agency heads, to me has been so important, but also having the leadership that you can work with who's on the same page and gets it, I think it is even better. And so we have, yeah, I'll stop there for a second. Yeah.
You talked a little bit about, but I just want, because of the breadth of your experience, I want to sort of key in on you talked a little bit about sort of like in the lead up to the Trump administration, sort of starting that multi-state effort. And I'm sure now in the mayor's office, looking at how you work with other people and sort of like that idea of being able to harness within state and local government other partners outside of your state, outside of your local government. How important is that in your view?
I mean, extremely important. I think what we're seeing, I look at what's happening in New York as this, it's very much part of a macro sort of situation that's happening in our country that is tied to our economic system, or at least the predominant economic system that we've had. And people are tired of that for a lot of reasons, because in the way that it has concentrated wealth, and because in the ways that it has just entrenched and made worse disparities and racism and discrimination, and all the things that we have been fighting so long, to combat. And so when I think about sort of like the ways that we work with the Attorney General's office, I'm seeing that more, and it's something I'm pushing as having coming from that. But we need a lot of doctrinal development on a variety of state issues. New York State, for example, just got a constitutional amendment to add gender identity and gender expression in 2024. And so what does that mean? Our mayor's Office of Equity and Racial Justice was started along with the Commission on Racial Equity. This is to talk about reparations. We have a state commission doing the same thing. And so I think the more that we can get our state and city aligned on at least from my perspective, on civil rights issues, which is sort of what I'm, embedded in, the more that we can get that aligned, I think the better from a lot of perspectives. First, on a practical perspective, to actually get things done and to actually deliver on the things that people need and that will actually remedy a lot of the problems that we have in this society. And then I think on a second level is that the one thing I will say about Donald Trump, well, polite thing that I will say about Donald Trump, is that in coming into this, I think even after the first administration, no one was really planning, because no one really thought it was going to happen. I mean, I think we all have to be honest with ourselves. I think working at an LGBTQ org, we certainly didn't have a playbook. But I think this time, when the stars started aligning, we really got ready for it. In a big way. And I think that's so important because it has really, as part of the strategy of showing Donald Trump has broken like foundational parts of our democracy, from doctrines we have relied on forever, case law we have relied on forever, institutions we have relied on forever. And I say that to say that in a post-Trump world, which we will get there, and I can't say what it's going to look like, but in that same planning, that's the kind of planning that we need to be doing now. Because in destroying many of these institutions, and I say this as a trans person, as a biracial Black person from the South, government was never great. And that's the truth. And we in this country, especially from the federal system, are wedded to this idea of like founding fathers and yeah. And it's just like, I don't know why that is just so stuck in people's head. It is anti-progress, it is regressive, and it's actually very dishonest when we're talking about serving all people. And so I want us to like truly dream in a big way. It's not about bringing these institutions back, to keep on going how we were going, but how can we actually have new systems of government that are different? Like, why have we not had a constitutional amendment in so long? Those are the kinds of things that I think we have to be asking ourselves, and I see the state and the city as trying to do sort of like, I guess sort of like, I hate to use that, like laboratories of experiment, yeah. But that kind of situation.
Great. And to get any of that, we're going to need individuals. And Phil, I think we have this this moment. We're at this conference. We've got law students. We've got practitioners. We've got it was up before. I can't see if it's still up. The sponsors representing all of this wide breadth of the legal world. But then you go down to the individuals. What role do individuals play in staying in the fight?
Sure. Excuse me. Well, Chris, thanks for moderating this panel. Thanks to my co-panelists. Thanks to ACS for inviting me to join the panel. Individuals are critical to all of this, and what you all have done as individuals is, I think, the first major step. You're here today. You showed up. We can't overstate the importance of showing up. We all have busy lives. We have families and friends that are that take up time. We have jobs. Some of our jobs do involve being part of this fight, but many of us, most of you in this room actually, your jobs, and I include being a student as a job, it doesn't involve directly being in the fight. So you all have made the conscious decision to take time out of your busy schedules, to spend resources and to show up, and that is vitally, vitally important. The second role for individuals is to hold each other accountable. Yes, it is easy to get sidetracked, especially when the Knicks go on an incredible winning streak. So we have to be honest with ourselves, we have to be honest with our friends and our colleagues, and to say, we need to do more. We expect more of ourselves and of one another. I do just want to pause for a moment to say that because we've come together as this community here, my answers reflect answers from this community. I, as an individual, don't have all the answers, but we collectively, as individuals, do. And so something that I heard in speaking in preparation for this panel and speaking with those who are in attendance here is the importance of individuals in sort of raising consciousness, demystifying the practice of law, the profession, demystifying the courts. We as law students and lawyers, as academics and judges, this is second nature to us, but it's not true for so many Americans, so many in our communities. And so we have an obligation to demystify these institutions, as imperfect as they are, to raise awareness of the legal terrain. We are bombarded constantly by political news. So we all know the polls, we all know which races are toss-ups and whatnot. But imparting our understanding of the legal terrain, our understanding of doctrine, our understanding of why Supreme Court decisions matter, that is something that belongs uniquely to us, and it's imperative that we do so.
One other piece of it that I feel like the Trump administration provides us a great example of what individuals do not do from their side that I think the left does a lot better, although still imperfectly in lots of ways, is listen, and the importance of individuals in listening. And I think something that I've gotten from ACS over the years is that there's just so much programming out there, so much happening, so many opportunities to listen to people who not only have expertise, unlike my own, but who have experience, who have backgrounds, who have lives unlike my own. And I think that that's something that does make ACS and the left so much stronger in the long run, that just individuals on the right miss.
I totally agree. Approaching conventions like this with an open mind, with an eagerness to learn, is vital. And listening is a big part of that. ACS does inform and educate. But one thing I want to emphasize, and we saw this with the previous panel on voting rights, informing and educating is critically important. Listening is critically important, but so too is taking action. And what I really appreciated about that previous panel was taking time at the end to say, these are concrete steps that you can go out and undertake. So my commitment here today as ACS president is, as we do more and more programming, as we host more content, more panels, we need to always not just ask the question of what now, what next, what can we do, but we need to help provide that guidance.
Great. I think despite our mid-panel interruption, I think it is such a physical manifestation that we got from all of you, not just through your experience, but who we have up here, of how broad the opportunities are for staying in the fight. And I guess just moving to sort of the second part of the panel and letting these amazing people get a little bit more in discussion with each other. When you look at, there's been a little bit of discussion of all of the different types of people out there. And the fact that I was writing down and I was like, you've got people from prosecutors and public defenders, defense side, plaintiff side attorneys, public-private attorneys, students, academics. You've got all of these different realms where you have people who are staying in the fight, are interested in protecting the rule of law, are interested in protecting democracy. When you all go out into your work each day, like, how do you think about engaging with those other people in all of those roles, whether for some of you, they're often adversarial to you? How do you think about your role and about their role? As the person who's sued people most recently, how about, like, how do you, when you are dealing with people who might not be thrilled to have you coming in there, but are still engaged in the practice of governance and the rule of law and supporting democracy, like, how do you think about that?
Yeah, it certainly wasn't the defendants we're talking about, I hope. Or who are we talking about in this case, in this situation?
Presumably, they listened to the rule of law. When you bring actions, like, we've got this boogeyman who's unfortunately very real of the Trump administration and all these constant questions about, like, just ignoring the rule of law.
Yeah.
But, like, out in the world, like, there are big firms that are going to be sued who are doing bad things, but still respect the rule of law. There are going to be localities, there are going to be, hypothetically, police departments that break the law. And yet they do still believe in the rule of law, most of them. And how can we, staying in the fight, work with them to make that a reality?
Well, I think I'm a Southerner, so I'm big on manners. But at the same time, I'm very uncompromising when it comes to civil rights, especially, from a litigation posture. And I will just be so very honest. I think of a few of the opposing counsel, at least from the federal level that I've dealt with, many of them ended up in sanction hearings in cases that I was involved in. I could send y'all a citation to a great one. And to me, in that situation, it's like, no, they don't care about the rule of law in a very big way. And that's concerning to me. But again, I think it exposes something that we need to clean up very quickly when we have the opportunity. But I think, like, when I think back to some of my time, my first 4 years was the first Trump administration, and then I had turned to the states. And I will say, in my litigation, I had a litigation against the state of West Virginia for refusing to provide trans people with birth certificates that safely and correctly match their gender marker and name. And then I had a litigation against the state of Georgia for their Medicaid program for not providing benefits for gender affirming surgical care. I actually had great relationships with those opposing counsel, and I think we really did come to a level of respect. And oftentimes, and I felt this very early in my days, but the tone really did shift when I would have to sit at opposing, usually the first time we would meet would be the 26F conference, and this would be the first time they've ever met a trans person first of all, a trans person, but also who's an attorney and also who's the lead attorney in this case. And the tone certainly shifts in a big way.
I so appreciate everything that Taylor has said, and I do think that the commitment to relationships despite of or in spite of, and civility, even when that's not reciprocated, is, I think, really important, because at some level, like, our souls are on the line, and who we are is on the line in all of this work. I think one of the things that I've noticed, which I'm sure other folks in the room have noticed, is that the confluence of issues, particularly in the civil rights space, has created some unusual bedfellows. I, like Taylor, was a litigator for a long time, but also a diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility practitioner, and that work these days has me spending a lot of time talking to employers who I have been previously adverse to and am a regulator around, right? About what practices are legal, and reminding them about the importance of doing that work. And I think that there is an opportunity to remind folks about who they are, and Phil was speaking to this, as well as Alice, who they are and what their commitments are. I also think that there's a self-interest here, and we see this perhaps most clearly in the context of some of the diversity, equity, and inclusion attacks. You think about the executive orders last year directed at particular law firms, followed quickly by really unauthorized letters from my colleague, Chair Lucas, directed at 20 law firms demanding that they produce information. And I think that example is instructive. 6 of those firms reached a settlement, agreeing to $100 to $125 million each in pro bono work or other work supporting the administration's priorities. Several of those firms, though, fought. And I think, it's worth going back and looking at the district court decision in the Perkins-Coie case. If you haven't read it, I highly recommend it. It's powerful. But also, I think it's quite clear, whether we're talking about law firms or universities or media, that the organizations that have stayed grounded in the law, speaking of rule of law, in their values, in their moral clarity about what's right and what's wrong, those institutions have emerged stronger from the fight than the organizations that capitulated. Right? So there's I think both operationally and reputationally, there's an important argument to be making, and I'm going to keep doing it in the context of civil rights work, but there's an important argument to be making to folks who maybe aren't our most natural allies, and Alice spoke to the importance of getting outside our bubble and building different bridges to stronger folks, expanding our coalition. I think the pro-democracy, pro-civil rights coalition is bigger than we think it is, but it requires us to think creatively about what the connective tissue is and how we can articulate it. I'll say sort of one last thing on this point. I was really lucky to be in the audience the other night when President Obama and the former First Lady spoke to alumni before the opening of the library the next day. And President Obama made this really, I think, very thoughtful criticism or critique of nostalgia. That nostalgia can make us long, it is longing, right, for something in the past. And to me, nostalgia and hopelessness can go hand in hand in that they make us passive. They make us unable or unwilling to act in the moment, and I think Phil spoke to the importance of action combined with, doctrinal insight and principle and commitment to the rule of law. And so, to me, the combination of things right now is how do we think creatively and identify those opportunities that allow us to get outside our bubbles and tell a larger story about our values, our commitment, our principle that probably is shared, to appeal to shared values from folks who may not naturally have been in our coalition. And then how do we stay committed to action, to community, to one another? Because I think that those two things together provide us with sort of a roadmap, maybe, or at least partially a roadmap.
Thanks. A lot of the focus, especially over the next 4 or 5 months, is going to be on the midterm elections. But when we're at a convention like this, have this group of people on the board. I want to just take a minute to look even further forward and ask you what is it that we need to be doing now to be preparing for the possibilities of what could happen in 2028 and then 2029? There's been the success of Project 2025 is clear by the fact that it's come up several times here on this panel. What do we need to be doing as part of staying in the fight to prepare for the possibilities of 2029?
So I'll start. I'm sure people
Okay.
have even better thoughts than I do. But number one, I think we have to be very serious about Supreme Court reform. Very serious, right? There's been a lot of talk about it, a lot of chatter about it. But this is the reality. We are basically, when we're talking about legislative proposals for Congress to do X or Y, painting an elaborate, intricate mural in a house which is burning down, right? And so we can either continue to tinker around the edges of the mural, or we could get the hose. And I'm for getting the hose, right? The Supreme Court is going to strike down any progressive legislation that comes through. That's just a reality. And this Supreme Court will do that. And so we need to think about what does it mean to curb that in some way. Is it jurisdiction stripping? Is it changing how cases get up there? Is it expanding the court? Is it having term limits on the court? What is the most defensible way to curb that third branch of government that is exercising an oversized control over our polity, over our democracy? So that's number one. And number two, I think we have to be very serious about developing a comprehensive understanding of how we think the Constitution should be interpreted. It is idiotic that we should interpret the Constitution to go back in time to a time when most of the people in this room had no rights. And that's what the Federalist Society has done. That makes no sense at all. But nevertheless, we have tons of people out there saying originalism somehow was handed down from on high and makes sense. It doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense. There was a fabulous panel earlier in this convention about talking about we the people as the animating principle of the Constitution, and taking seriously the idea that the Constitution should be interpreted in a way that expands the democratic polity. Right, that should be the background principle. And I think that work is really vital. And thinking about what that principle would mean for cases like Citizens United and Calais should be a spur to all of us to really be aggressively involved in that intellectual exercise.
I think I second all of that in a very big way. The Supreme Court reform, federal court reform in general, I think is something we need to talk about in a big way. But I also think, too, we need to really be thinking about accountability and accountability metrics as we move into this. There are states like Illinois that have started sort of like a Truth and Reconciliation Commission and things like that. Obviously, there are doctrines to get around, like qualified immunity and things like that, but people need to be held accountable for the harms that they committed during this administration, and I mean that so seriously. I think that is one thing, a reason that people are so turned off by government, because there is truly a lack of accountability that certainly can be overcame. I think the second thing that we have to focus on is true documentation of all of these harms, especially from a civil rights perspective. If we consider even litigating in state court, but even setting aside federal court and the ways that they have stripped different kinds of theories of proving discrimination, setting higher bars for what constitutes discrimination, that evidence is there, and I think that we need it. I think we need it from the federal, and it needs to be centralized in one place for all of us to move forward. And I also think that is also better cooperation amongst the states in a big way, and the cities, that sort of comprise them. I think that's also so very, very important. I think that we really have to be thinking better, like better on a big scale. And even if it doesn't seem feasible, and setting aside the court, also what are we going to do about Congress? A Congress that has not worked way before Trump. Again, I think we're at a point in our democracy where it's just not working. In a very real way, setting aside Trump. I think we were leading up to this, and now that we have so much extremism, I just don't see that easily going away. But I will say, I think that we just cannot return to the status quo, because for Black folks, for trans folks, for poor folks, that was never working, and it's never going to work. And so I think we really have to think about new ways of democracy. Why don't we have a referendum process on things? We look to other countries that have, again, I would love to recall President Trump right now. Keir Starmer is shaking in his boots right now. And why don't we have that over here? True different ways of doing democracy. We are so wedded to this, these founding fathers. It's just I just always tell people, those were not my dads.
I don't know how you would spell that, but I think that sums up a lot of feelings over the past.
And lastly, I think to this point of constitutional interpretation, I will say, I had never practiced in state court until I joined the Attorney General's office. Do not recommend it. But I will say, what really struck me in New York was that they have their canons of construction in their statutes. It's if you need to know sort of how you can interpret a statute, there's it's New York Statute Section 67. And I was so impressed by that in a way that again, we're not, pulling out a crystal ball and thinking, what was George Washington drinking that day when he decided to do this. It's that's the kind of stuff that I think we really need to think about. I'll stop there.
Thank you. Which, to be clear, what George Washington was drinking was literally important this week, if you didn't read.
I did not read.
Yeah.
So first, ACS does not endorse the position that you shouldn't litigate in state courts. That is not an official position of the organization. So two things. First, whether it is court reform or constitutional interpretation, whether it is accountability, documenting what we've seen, or trying to remind the public of Congress's powers under Article 1, as Taylor mentioned, rebuilding, as we heard in a couple of sessions yesterday, ACS has a vital role to play in this. And I think the panels at this convention highlight that role. We have to educate and inform. And we'll continue to do so, including on all of these topics with partner organizations in an effort to really drive attention. Second thing I'll say is, I think it's really important that we put all of this into concrete terms, into something that is meaningful and matters to people in their everyday lives. So why does it matter that originalism is misguided and that we should not tether constitutional interpretation to the 1780s and to a system and structure that discounts the humanity of women and Black and brown people, among others? We have to explain how that matters to people in their individual lives. We have to explain why accountability matters to people in their individual daily lives. And it's incumbent on all of us, ACS as an organization, but all of us as individuals, all of us as representative of institutions, organizations, governmental entities.
Thank you. one of the, it's come up a few times in the panel, but it's so ever present, this value of diversity that had, in my mind, sort of become a ever-present value. Was just so dramatically attacked directly in executive orders starting on January 20th. There's been nonstop litigation on every front since then. And I mean, we're right here. I'm going to be leaving here, changing to go to the Pride Parade. I know that, I mean, yesterday we had Juneteenth. Like, those are things that are sort of like being harmed actively just down the street. And I mean, obviously, I'll start with you.
Yeah.
I mean, you're having to deal day in and day out with the consequences of this.
Yeah.
I mean, what lessons are to be learned? What do we need to pay attention to in terms of sort of like the canary in the coal mine element of this attack on diversity and people not like them?
I think you're right about the idea that I think many of us had reached a degree of complacency about the value of diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility as a core set of principles that are that somehow were, baked in. And obviously, we're seeing that there's a great deal of work to do to define those terms, to reclaim the definition of those terms. And I often find myself looking backward to look forward, looking backward to help me understand the moment that we're in, and our civil rights history is often in the forefront of my mind. It was the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom in 1963 that led to the passage of the Civil Rights Act of '64 and to the ultimate foundation and formation of the EEOC. And so for me, history is a critical touchstone, right? It provides context for where we've come from, for the moment that we are in right now, and for where we're headed. And I think one of the things that I take from this moment and from our history, and there's some really terrific writing on this, new books that are coming out now and books that have been previously written that remind me that progress isn't linear. It's far from it. It ebbs and flows. It goes backwards and forwards. But also, and I'll come back to a point that I made a couple minutes ago, that our work, that our action in the face of backsliding can, and in fact does often make the difference. And I think that, so for me, like as I think about what's happening at the EEOC and across the federal government as it backslides in enforcing civil rights laws and civil rights protections, and perhaps more profoundly, challenging the underlying principles that those are values, that those are American values, I find it helpful to think about, why diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility work matters, and why it's important for us to continue to forcefully advocate for those values, right? The recognition that DEI, that diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility work is in fact the work of fostering a true meritocracy. Somehow that's gotten lost, right, in this discourse that we're living in. And I think it's incumbent on us to reclaim that. And it's particularly true, right, where we see these federal agencies, as I said, backsliding. And I think Taylor spoke so powerfully to the importance of the work that's happening in state and local governments to hold the line on that. I'm going to do my part to hold the line on that. We recently, the EEOC issued a couple of federal sector decisions involving, speaking of pride, involving the rights of, in particular, of trans folks in the federal sector. One that reversed previous decisions concluding that Title VII allows federal employers to deny trans employees access to bathrooms consistent with their gender identity, and another one in which the majority held that a categorical denial of insurance for gender-affirming care was not sex discrimination under Title VII. You know, this is just an example, right? But I think just speaking to the values that we're talking about here of diversity, I disagreed, obviously, with the substance and the tone of both of those decisions, just unbefitting a federal civil rights agency. And so I think, again, I'll come back to something I said earlier about the value of dissent, about the importance of dissent. My team and I wrote dissents in both of those decisions and published them. I don't have access to official channels at the EEOC anymore, so I use my LinkedIn page as a place to publish dissents. You know, I think.
I mean, but that
yeah,
is
but it's true.
That is
It's true.
a good point. That part of staying in the fight has been, and what I mean, as a journalist covering this, one of the things that I have been most impressed with over the course of the past year and a half, it is the creative ways
That's right.
that people from all of the from institutions, from within the government, from state and local, and individuals have acted in ways that probably made them a little uncomfortable. That were outside of
It's
the
a little
way
weird.
that they would
Yeah,
have done it.
It's a little weird. It's a little weird, but it's no weirder, right, than like major policy positions being dropped on the White House's Twitter feed, right? Like I think, you know, we have to meet the moment of the best way both to reclaim the narratives and also to effectively communicate those narratives in a flexible way. And so like that's how we're thinking about it from my office. You know, both that it's important what we say and it's important how we say it, and it's particularly important that we're not silent.
Thank you. On that note, the second CLE code is resilient. I'm not even kidding. It really is. Thank you so much to all four of you for incredible perspectives that I think are so helpful. I'm going to give you all a speed round, less than a minute answer while I look at these questions that will let you, there's been a lot of really intense discussion on this panel, in addition to a really intense fire alarm. Just want to ask you, like it has been a really difficult 17 months. 17 months today, not 2 years, despite the metaphorical feeling that we have. I just want you to go down the line and starting with you, Phil, where do you find the hope and motivation to stay in the fight?
Sure. So I addressed this a little bit in my welcome speech, but I know not everyone was here. Some were listening to the Obamas.
Sorry.
It's just jealousy, don't worry. So where I draw my hope, where I draw my own resilience is in knowing, as I mentioned, that those who came before us never gave up. Those who have always fought for a fairer and more just nation never gave up. Those who came to the United States fleeing oppression in their home countries never gave up. So if they never gave up, we are here because of them, and we owe it to future generations to do the same, to never give up.
So I can't really improve on that. But I'll try. I mean, for me, it's the day-to-day interactions with our members, right? That is very inspiring. It's the educator who I talk to and defend because, she's made the decision that she's going to teach Ta-Nehisi codes between the world and me to her high school students because it's a beautiful and powerful essay, and it will provoke them and engage them in a perspective that many of them have not heard before, right? It's a trans student who walks into middle school fully transitioned and has support of educators in that building to live her true self. Like, those are acts of everyday courage that I find incredibly inspiring. And I also think, looking back, you know, we all have a lot of political and social and capital in this room, right? And there are people who went before us who fought and died for the rights that we have that didn't have any of that, right? They had much smaller organizations with much fewer resources, and yet they secured the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act. And, you know, we can stand up too and secure those rights again.
Well, I think for me, it's honestly all I've ever known. And I mean, I think that's probably the realest answer I can give. I think my personal story has always been very tied to my work. And as I tell people, again, I am from rural Western North Carolina. I grew up in immense poverty. My dad was in prison until I was about 23. I was raised by a single mother, and so I became the first in my family to go to college and then law school. And so I think in coming out in college my first year in North Carolina, no less, before it was way cool to be trans, you know, I think I always tell people the story. It's like, I just remember I sat on the edge of my bed. I said, wow, you're poor, you're black, you're trans. Life's looking great. Life's looking great. But no, I also remember in that moment, like, unequivocally telling myself that, like, I would never let anyone treat me differently because of who I am. I know that I'm smart. I know that I'm qualified. I come from a long line of black women. Our church is on the North Carolina Civil Rights Trail because my great-grandmother and my great-aunt are part of a group of women known as the Seven Mothers who helped desegregate schools in my county after Brown v. Board. My aunt went on to become the first director of the Morgan Housing Authority after the Fair Housing Act was passed. I think about the sacrifices that those people in my life who I hold so close made, just everyday people. And so to get up every day and to be able to do this, knowing that I'm working to improve people's lives and knowing that people count on me and see themselves in me, that's really where it comes from, and I just can't think of anything else I would rather do.
Yeah, I think threads of all of those are what drives me. I take a great deal of pride, and I'm motivated by being part of that long struggle that you know, that I think Taylor alluded to and Phil alluded to. And then I'm really motivated by my knowledge that the work that we're engaged in is deeply righteous, by my grounding in that clarity that this is the work of building a more just government and an economy that in fact works for everybody, and a society that respects the innate dignity of every single human being. That's very motivating. And then I guess I'll also say, you know, my parents are immigrants. They came with $8 in their pocket, and I've watched what they've built in this country, and that is deeply motivating. And then I think the third thing that I'll say is that I have a community. I have a life outside of my professional life. I have my family. I have things that I do that fill my cup. I spend a lot of time in my garden. I cook. I do things that I think help to speak to my just fundamental humanity. I sit on the porch. I talk to my neighbors. And I think, you know, those things I know from my own experience are part of motivating me and giving me the strength to keep doing the work that we're all doing. But I think we're also seeing, like, if you think about Timothy Snyder's work, that it's pretty clear that work of our social connections, our social fabric, of small talk, of being in community with our neighbors and in the most mundane ways, is also the work of advancing democracy. So those are the ways that I'm thinking about it.
Thank you. Incredible questions. We're not going to have time to get to them all, but one that is most comes through in a few questions is this idea that like when we're talking about institutions, there's been some discussion about the fact that like they weren't great from the start. And when we're in this moment and looking forward, how when there is an ability to regain control of institutions, both inside and outside the government, how do we do that well and better?
Can I just say that I thought Phil's comments earlier about listening were really foundational to that, right? What we leave behind, what we claim as important and make stronger, what we decide is past its due date, and how we create, as Taylor said so wisely, the new institutions that in fact reflect our modern democracy. That work requires us to be quiet and listen. I also think it requires us to get outside the Beltway. Something that is, I think, hard for many of our federal institutions. I think I may be the first EEOC commissioner that lives not in Washington, D.C. I come back and forth all the time, and I work from a different EEOC office when I'm not here and when I'm not in other EEOC offices around the country. I think that there is wisdom in the ordinary and wisdom outside of, 495 that we are missing. And so whatever comes next needs to incorporate that insight and that wisdom, and back to Phil's point, I think listening.
Great. To get some more questions in, Phil, got one directly for you. We need affirmative guidance for the fight, you've said. What is ACS's strategy for that, for growth of ACS, for making ACS key to that moment?
Sure. I mean, it's on several levels. Don't understate the importance of programming, right? Don't understate the importance of being in rooms like this, hearing from incredible leaders like those alongside me on this stage, learning, listening, and then going out and taking concrete steps. So I want to just speak briefly to the concrete steps, especially with students in mind, and those practitioners who are earlier in their career, perhaps. Go do pro bono work, right? I mean, it seems so long ago that that the Doge cuts occurred, but there are still ripple effects. And so nonprofits are struggling, right? Maybe not the nonprofits that are represented here at this convention, but the small nonprofits, the 5-person nonprofits all across the country. So do the pro bono work at your school. If you're at a firm, push your firm to take on more pro bono work. I think ACS's role in helping coordinate and facilitate that is a critical one. Second thing, again, for those hosting ACS events, and we have a tremendous number of chapter leaders here, when you go back and you're planning out your agenda, your schedule for next school year, and you're thinking about programming, don't just tie your programming to the moment and to what is most timely and relevant, but make sure you are giving that direction and guidance at the end of the programming about what people can go out and do. Give the action items, the do-outs, whatever you want to call it, and partner, right? So you want to host a panel discussion on voting rights post-Calais. Well, bring in a local nonpartisan voting rights organization to register people in the back of the room after the panel discussion ends. Sign up to go out and register voters in the community. That is a way for ACS to leverage not just our infrastructure, our network, but our partner organizations. There's a lot more I can say about this, but I know we want to get to a couple more questions, so I'll kick it back to you.
Yeah, Taylor, something that it sounds like you've talked with a little bit already, but how do we deal with bringing in marginalized communities who feel that the left hasn't always protected them?
Well, I think it starts with being honest. I think that's something people have a very hard time doing, especially when we talk about history. Especially, you know, I'm a very critical person, but that's because, like, I believe you need criticism to be better. And so I think in that way, being honest and about what we're actually doing. Like, again, I don't trust the civil rights laws of 1964, because guess who they were written by? People that don't look like me. And when you look at the history of the enforcement of those laws, that's why we are where we are today. I mean, there's a lot of things that we need to say openly and honestly, and discussions that we need to have, that I just don't think we're able to do that reaches the communities that we are purporting to serve and that we need to serve in a very big way. And so I think it's that, and again, I just cannot understate the importance of leadership. Like, I can go into rooms certain people cannot go into just because of connection, just because of my life experience. And I still think we have a major problem with that in the DNC, to be so honest. And it just doesn't actually reflect the values that we say that we have.
Thank you. I just want to thank everybody on this panel for the work that they're doing, for the insights that they shared today. I think as somebody who has been in and out covering the work that all of these people are doing and the fight that you all are engaged in, it is like these broader discussions, these moments that there is a need to take a time, step back, assess where things are at, because otherwise, and I mean, I've fallen victim to this myself, like it is possible to keep going nonstop until you just crash. But that's why conferences like this are so essential, because we're never going to move forward if we don't actually do so intentionally. So I'm really grateful to all of you for being here and sharing your wisdom this morning. And with that, I will end this panel and turn it over to Phil to end the day.
Thank you, Chris. Thanks to all of you. First, just a big thank you to our sponsors, to all of our speakers, to the great staff, the Omni Showroom, to the attendees, and to the terrific staff from ACS for putting all of this together. So let's just give a collective round of applause here. So in addition to what we've heard about staying in the fight, think about everything that we've learned these past couple days about the assault and defense of the rule of law, assault on and defense of the rule of law, about the vital importance of judicial and Justice Department independence, about a new way of approaching constitutional interpretation, the ways that AI can be both transformational and disruptive, the meaning of Juneteenth, and the pressing need to really reinvigorate the second founding, how local counsel are stepping up, not just in defense of nonprofits, but in defense of democracy writ large, and how to respond to Calais, including, if you were in the panel, by calling Mikey Sherrill's office. I hope that you're leaving here better informed. I hope that you're leaving here inspired and with action items that you all can go forward and implement in your own lives. I hope you've had a chance to make new connections and reconnect with those from your past. And as you head back home, travel safely, continue to be emissaries for ACS, show up, keep the faith, and be an active part of bringing about a better and brighter future. Thanks very much.